Stefan Kinsella, welcome back to the What is Money Show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you again. We're going to continue going through Hoppe's excellent book, A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism. And I'll get us rolling here, reading an excerpt on page 19 in the PDF version of this book. Hoppe writes, to develop the concept of property, it is necessary for goods to be scarce so that conflicts over the use of these goods can possibly arise. It is the function of property rights to avoid such possible clashes over the use of scarce resources by assigning rights of exclusive ownership. Property is thus a normative concept, a concept designed to make a conflict-free interaction possible by stipulating mutually binding rules of conduct, norms, regarding scarce resources. So, this is one of those concepts that I visit a lot on this show and have a really hard time because people have these preconceived notions of property, right? That property is just the asset. But it's really this, as Hoppe is describing here, this normative way of dealing with the reality of scarcity, right? There are limited things in the world, and there are more wants than there are for certain things. Those things are scarce. We have to resolve conflict over those scarce resources either by contract or, the other approach is like actual conflict, physical conflict.
Right.
Something more coercive.
Well, notice his first sentence is to develop the concept of property, there need to be scarce goods. So what he's saying there, and the Randians hate when we talk like this because they think we're focusing on the negative or something like that. Or it's like the economic or political equivalent of saying that rights are based upon the ability to feel pain or something, which but it's not like that. What Hans is saying is that we have to recognize why property rules emerge. They emerge because we are actors, and we are actors, which means to act means to use scarce resources or means to achieve ends. And when we achieve ends, we're trying to change the future from something that we think it will be to something that we prefer it to be, which means that the world is not perfect. In other words, it means we're unsatisfied or dissatisfied, or uneasy, as Mises calls it. And this all implies that we live in a world of scarcity. Okay. We live in a world where all of our wants can't be satisfied just at whim. We have to do something to try to get it. And then they're not always possible to be solved because there's limited resources and there's competition for these resources with other people. There's competition for them, which means the possibility of a clash or a conflict because the resources are scarce, which means they have a property which is they can only be used by one person at a time. So if someone sees a coconut and someone else sees the coconut, they both want the coconut. They can't both have it at the same time. Only one can consume the coconut. So that means there's a possibility of conflict. So it's the possibility of conflict that gives rise to the problem of conflict, which we need to try to solve somehow. You could try to solve it by, I don't know, becoming immortal and omnipotent and God, I guess, but that's not really feasible. So the other way we try to solve it is we recognize that we live in society among a bunch of similarly placed actors or agents, human beings that have similar capacities, similar desires, similar wants. They all need to use scarce resources, but we tend to prefer to use these things without violently battling each other for them all the time, because that gets us nowhere. It's a lose-lose game.
Right.
And because it costs resources and effort to just fight with each other, and you still don't increase the sum total of resources. So we would prefer to have cooperative use of these resources, which implies the need to have a set of rules that assign owners to every given resource. There needs to be a rule that says who is the actor that has the better claim to it. So that's what property rights are. And we say norms because a norm is a normative rule that you can consult to tell you how you should act in a given situation, or who should win. So that's what property rights are. Property rights are rules that emerge in society out of the desire for people to be able to use resources peacefully and cooperatively and without conflict. So these rules assign owners. And so then the question is, what are the contents of the particular rules? And that's where libertarianism comes in, and the Lockean natural rights perspective, and that's where it differs from all other competing theories, which we would all call variations of a type of socialism, whether it's autocratic or democratic or authoritarian or communist or Democrat socialist or whatever. Um, uh, all those rules differ in how they specify who has the right to control a resource. But anyway, so the point is, once you understand that the purpose of property rights is to help us solve the problem of the possibility of conflict, which emerges because of the nature of scarcity in the real world, then you understand that property rules are just those rules. And so then you start to see when people refer to like a piece of land or a car as as your property, it's a slight misuse of the word, or at least it can lead to confusion, because technically speaking, if we want to be precise, the word property is the relationship between human beings with respect to these scarce resources. So my property right in a car basically means I have a connection to that car that is distinct and superior to everyone else's, that other people can see and respect if they want to avoid conflict.
Yeah, brilliantly said. One thing that really jumps out for me there is just the nature of the two different approaches for resolving conflicts over scarce resources. As you said, we can have some normative arrangement like property, or you can just have the fighting, right? The fighting over the stuff itself. And those two different modes of relating to scarce resources have significant impact on how much we're able to conquer scarcity, right? To increase productivity and capital accumulation and all these things. The fighting would be a zero-sum game, right? It's not creating any more pie. The pie's not getting bigger. Whereas if you have private property enabled free trade, we can actually grow the pie. And so that's kind of the magic of capitalism in a way.
Yeah, not only that, I think the fighting is a negative sum game, because you have to expend resources to engage in battle. Even if you win the battle, and you're the winner, you had to expend resources to get there. It's sort of it goes along economically with the idea that capitalism and society progresses by having what we call lower time preference, which corresponds to a longer time horizon, which corresponds to longer term projects. Okay. And so in capitalism, you can have more profit in a sense, or more output, more productivity, if you have a longer time horizon. So you can, you plant a crop, and if it's trees or something, you can't use it for a few years. You have to wait, as opposed to going into the woods and just chopping the first tree down that you see. And if you keep doing that, soon you'll have no trees left. Or you might plant something that would last, you could reap in a month. But if you could start a factory, then you don't see the profits for 20 years. That's a longer time horizon. But the only way to engage in these long-term projects is to have stability of property rights, because you're not going to invest your resources in something that can be taken away in a month or a year or 10 years. So security of property rights, that is a normative approach to solving conflict, permits us to engage in longer term planning, and that produces more prosperity. So this is why, if you think of competition among societies on the world, societies that happen to settle upon more Lockean type private property rules are going to be more prosperous than other areas or regions which don't, because they're going to be living hand to mouth. I mean, think of Africa versus Europe. Africa is poor and Europe is prosperous, and the West is prosperous. And that's primarily because of the differences in the way property rights are institutionally respected. So you can engage in longer term projects. If you can't count on the future, that is, if you live in a might makes right society, which basically means there's no right, there's only might, right? So the normative view means that we have a built-in society-wide ethos where people tend to respect these norms, even though they're not self-enforcing. We voluntarily abide by them. Now, the few people that don't are regarded as outlaws or criminals and are dealt with as what Hoppe calls mere technical obstacles, or mere technical problems. But that's basically the way you look at it.